Hello, welcome to From Caracas. I'm Laura Prada. In this opportunity, we have a special guest. We'll be talking with Blessed Ngwenya. He's a doctor from South Africa, and he's a social legal doctor on social legal studies. And we'll be talking with him about the global colonialism and ideas of how Africa and Latin America can unite towards building bound together global south. So welcome.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for sharing some of your time here in Caracas with us.
I'm humbled to be here.
Please, why are you in Caracas, so we can tell our audience, and how has your experience been so far here in Venezuela?
I think first and foremost, I have to say it's my first time in Latin America. And I think I'm having a wonderful time. Otherwise, my knowledge of Venezuela has been largely from the misinformations, disinformations, and deliberate omissions by CNN and the BBC. So when I arrived, I thought I was going to, since it's supposedly a country in turmoil, I was supposed to see soldiers everywhere, unhappy people, so much suffering. To be frank, I am really surprised and in awe of this beautiful place, beautiful people, warm people, and I think I've never been to a city that is as clean as this. I think I was asking my friend Oscar, how do you do it to make this city so clean? But I mean, that's my experience in Venezuela. I just came here to be the host of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
And you've been to a seminar about colonialism and about how society has to understand the damages left by slavery and colonialism.
Oh yes, definitely. We were talking about reparations. And reparations, there's been so many debates, cases for and cases against reparations. I presented in one of the seminars, but my position was that we need to start rethinking and reimagining reparations, because of late it has been on a financial plane whereby it's a compensatory thing. But yet reparations are deeper than that. They are about restoration, they are about reconciliation, they are about repair, damages of historical injustices of the past. Of course, it's not injustice of the past per se, they continue up to today. So my position was that yes, reparations are a must, but we need to rethink about them. Let's look at the foundation, and the foundation is to bring back those who have been peripheralized, marginalized, back into the human realm.
We've heard in recent times that the Caribbean community, CARICOM, also ALBA, the alternative for the countries of Latin America, they have said that there needs to be reparations, there needs to be conscience about what slavery cost and colonialism cost to Latin America and to Africa, and how that Afro-descendant relation binds together both continents. How is that possible today in the world? Is it possible? Are those reparations possible? And is that brotherhood between Latin America and Africa possible to be that strong so reparations can be done effectively?
Yeah, reparations are very possible anytime, anywhere. The thing is, when we just to hark back to your earlier point of solidarity, yes, there have been so many inroads between the Americas, Latin America and Africa. Of course, suffering does bring people together. Injustices do bring people together. But what we have seen is that in the past, a system that oppresses people tries to fragment people all the time, so that each and every person, they speak from their own corner. So that sometimes when you're talking about reparations, you find that people start talking about who is going to be compensated, how and why, and the method and so forth. So people now begin to speak in different corners, in different languages, and that fragmentation delays basically the whole process. But the solidarity is key, because people need to speak in one voice. So that is why I was saying this should be pitched at an epistemic level, whereby people begin to think about reparations. What are they for? For instance, we cannot just throw money at people. Can you attach a monetary value to loss of dignity? It is impossible. No. But what you can do is that first, people should be brought back into the realm of being human. The skepticism of their humanity should cease. I think that is the beginning point. Because if you are going to throw money at any injustice, then you might as well go around kicking people and giving them money, kicking people and giving them money. So reparations, what is also important about reparations is that, one, they are a deterrent. Why am I saying they're a deterrent? Slavery, just like apartheid, was in the national consciousness, just as like apartheid in South Africa was in national consciousness, supported by law. Slavery was supported by Eurocentric morality. It was okay to them. But now, if such things are addressed, particularly reparations, so there's an acknowledgement that this thing was wrong, it was an injustice. And also people who have been alienated, particularly the black people or the Afro descendants, actually now they are removed from alienation, because with some theorists have spoken of generational trauma. We can actually see that these things keep on affecting the black diaspora or any other person who is marginalized.
I was telling you about that brotherhood when I asked you before, that brotherhood between Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa. How is that expressed today, so many years after were people from Africa brought to Latin America and the Caribbean as slaves? And how has that community, that Afro-descendant legacy, contributed to build, to make such a strong brotherhood between both continents?
I think perhaps one could be eschatological in this response, but at the same time, reading from today, what I'm trying to say is that I think there's a new generation, like as Fanon said, each and every generation, they've got their own struggle that they fight. I've realized that with the decolonial epistemic lens, it actually ties these people together, the Americas, the Caribbean, and also the African, even Asia, because it is also what I mentioned earlier on, that injustices bind people together. It is actually a glue to bring people together for a quest for their wholeness and the quest for their freedom. So the decolonial epistemic lens is beginning at the right place. But we know that in terms of a colonial university, which has been inherited by almost everyone in the globe, the idea is for Europe to come and study people, perhaps in the Americas, perhaps in Africa, perhaps in Asia. But you don't have people leaving Africa or the Americas to study Europe. You see, that kind of thing. So that thing is actually part of the fabric in terms of epistemic positioning. Africans, it is rare that they study Jamaica. It is Africans, it is rare that they study Latin America. It is rare, it is always that a problematic. But I believe with the decolonial epistemic lens, those boundaries are being collapsed. Perhaps I should call it the Jericho Wall is being collapsed.
How is Latin America seen in Africa, in South Africa, for example?
Latin America, okay, maybe I should start with Venezuela. Venezuela is seen as this brother, it's the brother country, because it is in the cold face of imperialist assault, and it acts as a template and a reference point that this assault can be survived, because Venezuela has been steadfast in resisting this form of imperial oppression. I don't know, but especially with the issue of sanctions, these criminal blockades, what is coming through, because it is a template that has been practiced over and over again. It's either people, what they do, the imperialists, what they do is either they assassinate the leader and then impose a new person, or they create turmoil within the country via scarcity, perhaps via fictitious shortage of commodities, and then with the hope that the people or the masses are going to push out the leadership. But as I said earlier on, it is not a template that can be relied on. I'm trying to link it with Venezuela. Why we love Venezuela. impoverishment of people does not necessarily mean that people are going to rise against a particular government. People can be resilient. The opposite effect can be experienced, and that's why Venezuela is a good example. I mean, it's Venezuela, Haiti, and Cuba. They are always like up there as templates and reference points for liberation.
You are related to the South African Broadcasting Company.
I am not, but I studied it, yes.
But in some way you're related because you studied it, you research on it.
Yeah.
And related to that, I want to ask you, why do you think it's important that African issues are broadcasted to the world and are sent as messages different, that messages that comes from Africa, that the news that comes from Africa, that mass media show, are not only those from wars, from terrorism, from diseases, which is the image that we must also see and search for from Africa in the media?
I mean that is a very important question. It's actually insightful in itself. It opens many avenues to understanding of things. The SABC should be understood as inherited from an apartheid past. So its institutional form and its content also has some vestiges of apartheid in approach. I mean, you cannot just erase institutional memory over time. And also, if you look at issues, I studied independence. If you look at issues of independence, the independence is inscribed in the Constitution, or the Broadcasting Act says independence from politics and from economics, right? But that tries to say, oh, the SABC is this neutral thing, is this neutral broadcaster. But it is not necessarily that. There's nothing called neutral. And also there's nothing called independent. Independence is a myth. Independence from what? Independence from who? Independence to do what? So when you look at basically the SABC in terms of content, right? There is the markets. The markets also decide what is being aired. So if it decides what is being aired, we know by journalistic principles, they say when it bleeds, it leads. So when you reinforce the particular stereotypes of the past, it's dehumanization, it's the skepticism of the humanity of others. Mm-hmm. So I'll just give an example, like for instance, to see a poor black person in the street begging in the context of South Africa, that's basically normal. But if you see a white person basically begging, that does not a link, or that does not resonate with the idea of a human. A human should not suffer like that. If you can encounter, I'm not saying there are no beggars white beggars in South Africa, but if you encounter such, the empathy they get, you just give them 500 South African rands. It's like, wow, he's not supposed to be here, because it has been cultivated into you that, oh no, this particular person, this particular body is not supposed to be here. But if it's that other body, it is supposed to be there. You don't even look at them. So Africa, when Africa is a huge, it's a continent with 54 countries. I mean, the cultures are different and so forth. Mm-hmm. Of course, we have the wars, but to say the content, I just want to relate to the point I said the form of the institutions should be changed, and also the content. Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to say is that perhaps instead of broadcasting the manifestations, what should be broadcast is the root cause. So if you look at wars, let's just give an example of Rwanda, the genocide. Mm-hmm. Very bad thing. 1 million people died. Wow, Africans, violent, barbaric. But who was behind the whole thing? France and Belgium. So perhaps change the content that way, that kind of thing. But remember I said when it bleeds, it leads. So you can't move out the template, off the template. But how do you move off the template? I think it goes back to Chavez when he spoke about the South-South solidarity. Mm-hmm. Why can't we have a Tele-South a TV station or radio station that speaks to these issues, that speaks to the humanity of others? And that should not only end with the cultural industries such as the media. It should also perhaps also link to the finances. I think maybe a South Bank instead of the World Bank and the IMF and so forth. I mean, that's how we begin to imagine. Is it the world we are living in today of violence and everything was imagined before it was implemented? So we should not restrict our imagination, because once we imagine, we speak it, it exists.
Related to speaking about things, and there they come into truth, to reality. Many years there has been people talking about what apartheid cost to South Africa, but more than 20 years ago, South Africa finally freed itself from apartheid regime. And there was the leading figure of Mandela ahead of that movement, ahead of that throwing out of the apartheid regime. How has the South African society evolved since then? Are there still vestige of what the apartheid cost to the society?
Perhaps I can respond that to the question in two forms. It's a very complex question, one has to say. I think, okay, let me just start by, it looks like it's a digression, but it's not. In South Africa today, the white population is 8%, 0.8%. But the white population owns 72% of the land. The black population is 80%. It owns only 4% of the land. What does this say to us? Does it say there's a black government in these past 20 years? Perhaps not. Maybe it says there are still struggles. But it is these questions that the youth is asking. There are some questions that have been asked underneath chairs and underneath carpets, but the youth today are asking those questions on rooftops. We have the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, whose leader is Julius Malema. It's a youthful party. It's asking these questions relating to land. But what I'm driving at is that Mandela is a father figure, not only in South Africa, the continent, and perhaps the world at large. He's written in the echelons of history, perhaps to posterity. But today the youth, they are questioning, was Mandela a sellout or a hero?
I ask you.
Yes.
For example, was he a sellout or a hero?
For me, we have many Mandelas. We have Mandela before prison, we have Mandela in prison, we have Mandela after prison, and we have Mandela as president, and we have Mandela post being president. But he saw the struggles of his generation, and he stood up and he was counted. But when he came out of prison, there were so many. I think so much cannot be asked of one person, especially with global coloniality. We know there's no one who has been so successful, or any country.
How does global coloniality influence on those persons, those leaders who fight, who defend ideas like Mandela did?
Oh, here it's a system against a person, and Mandela was not alone, isn't it, in Libya, but as a figure. But a system actually swallows up individuals, especially when if people are fighting from their own different corners, right? Instead of fighting as a coordinate, one should say. But the system, it has moved in so many different ways in the past. You can see, like in history, starting with maybe I am starting with Marcus Garvey, the way he was impoverished. You go to Martin Luther King, shot dead, JF Kennedy, assassinated, Malcolm X. But the system changes, it morphs like a chameleon. Sometimes it can outright kill, sometimes it can sabotage economies, sometimes it can appropriate, right? I mean, we have to admit, Mandela was a tired man, but he ran his race. He played his part. he passed on the baton stick. So we cannot keep on looking back to Mandela to have changed some of the things that we are still failing to change today, years after his death.
How then, just before we end, how society can prepare then to face, to put an stop to that coloniality?
To be frank, this is another very important question, which that's why I'm here and why we've been deliberating about this. One of the tools of coloniality, it's more like a ruse, is to make any form of oppression natural. You don't fight a natural thing, isn't it? If it's natural and then you accept it, you don't fight it because it is natural. You look like an idiot. So one of the tools that naturalize this coloniality and oppression is education. In other words, the university. Societies, most of the time, they're built in the image of the university. It can be a small place in a sea of what called barbarism, but it shapes the particular community, the ideas that come from there. So what is key is to change the education system, and the education system moves people away from false consciousness. So once people move from false consciousness, you can bring anything. You can bring a typhoon, you can bring an earthquake, they will stay in principle.
So everything comes up to education then?
Not everything, but education is key.
It's key in facing the challenges that coloniality puts up to the world today, to the societies in the world.
Yes, because coloniality came through the mind. We were first conquered in the mind before we were conquered physically. So let us liberate the mind, then we'll liberate ourselves physically.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Hi.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We've been talking with Blessed Ngwenya. He's from South Africa. He's a doctor specialized in social legal studies from South Africa, with whom we spoke about the ways in which colonialism and coloniality comes in a disguised way to the world today, and how society should prepare and should face it. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us. Until next time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.